I don't think anything I could ever recommend would be as deep as this one or raw.
I think that reading this and discussing it after every chapter, every section would probably be a little bit more helpful in gleaning the most out of what the book is intended to give to the audience.
To me, this book really stood out among anything else I have ever read because of the atrocities that are just depicted in it.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Welcome back, second pagers. This is Beyond the First Page with siblings Phoebe, Isaac, and Phil. I'm Phoebe.
And I'm Isaac.
I'm Phil.
And today we are meeting for Club Meeting 15 to discuss Beloved by Toni Morrison. As always, this is a reminder to like and follow us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, and you can find our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please feel free to comment and let us know what you'd like to hear in any upcoming book club meetings. We also talk about spoilers and major plot points from throughout the book, so if you don't want to get any books ruined for you, we recommend that you read the book and then come on and listen to the podcast. And before we get started on today's episode, I want to ask Isaac and Phil what their most memorable audiobook on a road trip has been. And to give a little context to that, in the next 2 months, but all three of us will have moved from either from a different house or across the country. And so an audiobook is a staple part of any trip. And growing up, we listened to them with our dad as a librarian as well. So I'm sure we all three have unique and memorable experiences. Phil, do you want to share your experience first, or your most memorable?
Yeah, mine was The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, which we listened to with Dad probably when I was like 9 or 10. And well, first of all, it's an easy read, like a page turner. But second, I remember being so enamored with the plot. But when Dad was in a really bad mood, he would just want to sit in silence. So I had to be like, can we turn on the Da Vinci?
He did that with all.
Wait, where were we
audiobooks, though.
going, Phil? Yeah,
Just
he did.
it was just around Latrobe. We weren't going anywhere. We were just driving around. So like we'd get in the car after Walmart after he was just mad. And I was just like, can we turn on the Da Vinci? Or he would put on the radio, obviously wanting to just listen to his own thing. And I'd be like, can we put on the Da Vinci?
I don't really remember I remember him listening to it, but I don't remember being at all interested in the Da Vinci Code, to be honest with you.
Oh,
I only remember the
Yeah.
beginning part when the albino beats himself. Yeah.
Flays
Oh,
himself.
yeah. Yeah, that was messed up. What about you, Isaac?
So mine is also with Dad as a kid. It's the audiobook version of The Empire Strikes Back. And they were really good because they had the characters from that played the actors in Star Wars do the readings as well. So you would hear Luke Skywalker and Han Solo's voice as Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford. Like you would hear
Mark Hamill.
all the people as they actually sounded, but there was more dialogue for the books. But what was memorable for me is we went and saw Stephen Kellogg, who's probably my favorite children's author and illustrator, in Pittsburgh, and Dad was giving him a ride back to the hotel in Greensburg. And Phoebe, you were with me. We asked Dad to put the audiobook on in the back speakers. While we had the chance to like talk to this author, and I'm like, let's hear Empire Strikes Back, baby. And so Dad like puts it on, puts it to the back, and then turns it around really low. So Phoebe and I are just like have our ear like bumped up to the speaker.
I just remember our friends being like, you guys are really like Star Wars. You're listening to it on the radio.
Yeah, that and like just we call them books on tape because I feel like again we were listening to audiobooks before they were like audiobooks were a thing that you had to actually change the tape or the CD then and then finally an audiobook.
Oh yeah, and Dad was
I
like
don't
busy
remember that.
talking to Stephen Kellogg, so I had to walk up to the front of the van dig through the CDs, get the new CD, put it in. Like I'm like butting my head in between them as they're talking. Yeah.
It's like not giving a shit about this like world-class author in the front seat. Yeah.
So embarrassing.
That's so funny.
Could you guys quiet down?
So mine obviously is also with dad. It's twofold. Isaac, you'll get a kick out of the first one. We would always drive one of my teammates in basketball. Dad coached us in basketball in 7th grade. And I think 6th, 7th, and 8th. I can't remember. Or maybe it was 5th and 6th grade he coached us. And we would always give one of my friends a ride. And he listened to Bosch, actually. He was listening to Bosch. But of course, we had no idea what was going on. We just knew like Bosch. And then we would try and it was like early, you know, dad's listening to Bosch and we're trying to sleep in the back seat and we can't because we're coming in and out. You get captured by this audiobook even though you don't care about it because you're in the car and that's what you can listen to. So I remember that. And now I love Bosch as a series, but as a 6th grade girl, I was not that interested. And then I also remember him listening to The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It is like the most boring book like you could ever listen to.
He loves Cormac McCarthy.
And you're just like, please turn this off. Can we please go back to listening to Star Wars? Anything. So those two were a miss for me. Well, Bosch was an initial miss. Now it's fabulous. I love Bosch, but
You should read The Road because it's
is it okay? So maybe I'll come back. Just like the middle school me.
Not when you're 10 years
right.
old.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all could have guessed that they would have been around Dad and the car because he was always driving us somewhere and listening to books. So, cool. Well, I'm curious to see what our listeners say as far as their most memorable audiobook experience. Maybe some of them will have been with the Cornell family.
Yeah.
And we can get into Beloved a little bit more. Isaac, would you like to do Beloved in 60 seconds?
Sure. So this is Beloved in 60 seconds. Sethe is a escaped slave living in post-Civil War rural Ohio with her only child left, Denver. When a man from her past shows up, who's named Paul D, and moves in, things for the small family begin to change. Firstly, the ghost of Sethe's daughter that had passed away 18 years ago and been haunting the house that they live in disappears. But after Paul D moves in, a girl named Beloved shows up and quickly becomes part of their lives. Denver knows early on that she is her long-dead sister, but it takes Sethe and Paul D longer to catch on. Beloved demands more and more of Sethe's attention and eventually drives Paul D away and begins to suck the life from Sethe. Denver is forced to go out on her own to take on work and attempt to care for her mother and Beloved, but she is concerned that they have become so codependent of each other that one of them will inevitably harm the other.
Yeah, that's a great summarization, Isaac. And I think it helps too because we talked about it. I think because of, and we'll get into this, there is a lot going on with if this is reality for these characters or if this is a figment of their imagination or this is a spiritual embodiment. And so just to kind of help people understand what is really going on, that was perfect. And I think we could talk about that first probably because the elephant in the room is what is Beloved. Obviously, you realize that she isn't just someone that only Sethe can see or only Denver can see, but other people have witnessed and seen her. And so I think, Phil, you had written down when we talked before this, just to talk about what we wanted to say, is Beloved a spirit? Is she supposed to be a abstract idea? What is Beloved supposed to be? Because again, she's been seen by other people other than Sethe and Denver. What do you guys think?
I just am not sure that this book was meant to be read in one sitting. This book is a perfect read by the chapter and discuss book because I think it's so filled with symbolism and themes and just what is also very heavy. So it takes a toll. But I do think she represents so much more than just the dead child that Sethe kills. And I think that she does sort of haunt Sethe like a dead child, but I think that the entire time she definitely does represent the idea of slavery and its hold on people's lives even after they escape. First, she breaks families apart. Denver really realized what she was doing, driving a wedge between her and Sethe, and Denver sees her choking Sethe, which I think is very obvious. There's the idea that she drives away Paul D by trying to seduce him. The entire sort of origin story of her, of being crossing the water in a damp, crowded, dark space, I think is very similar to how slaves came across the Atlantic. I think that that's her representation, to me at least. The biggest thing is that they just can't get rid of her. She stays, and she really wreaks havoc on Sethe. And I don't think there was ever a time that Sethe was healthy or fine, but she does just malinger and really drives her mad.
That's an interesting take, and Phil, I agree. I think that reading this and discussing it after every chapter, every section would probably be a little bit more helpful in gleaning the most out of what the book is intended to give to the audience. Because I think, to be quite frank, up front, I think a lot of it was lost on me. But this was like a horror film to me. She was like getting bigger at the end. They were describing her as almost pregnant, whereas Sethe was withering away. So I guess what would your analogy, if she is slavery, what is Sethe?
I think Sethe is the black woman. Like, she's the black person. She is the black person in America post-slavery.
Yeah,
She's
victim.
representing herself.
Yeah.
And I think that in that one, she's trauma.
And I would say, too, further, that is Paul D and all of these other people who were enslaved who have now become free are also that. They're all being affected. Paul D was affected by it. Denver was affected by her. Baby Suggs was affected by her. Both the brothers were affected by Beloved dying and then not being reborn, but still that whole situation, she was affecting that. Well, it was her because she was haunting the house after the birth. So then all these people essentially either did not want to live there anymore or lost the will to live because it was just too overpowering, which I think is exactly then lends to your point, Phil, of Beloved being slavery.
I think also you bring up a really good point with Paul D. Just remember that Beloved was the one who unlocked that box. I think it was a tobacco tin or of Paul D's heart that was broken by Beloved.
Yeah, I have a quote actually talking about this, and it's about Paul D. It says, "Tell me something, Stamp." Paul D's eyes were roomy. "Tell me this one thing. How much is the N-word, supposed to take? Tell me how much." "All he can," said Stampede. "All he can. Why? Yeah, I think that was really a poignant quote to me, and it is exactly what you guys are saying.
So you're saying Beloved was this character who had the ability to break people down? Like, that was the point of her? I didn't really see how I saw more her as like a torturer of Paul D, not a unlocking of emotion necessarily. I guess mental torture. Yeah.
No, but I think that for Paul D, that I think him and Sethe had a maybe not healthiest, but they were making each other happy. They were becoming a family a little bit. She then sort of prevented that for Paul D.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of talking about all these characters, and Phil, you had another point of this idea of masculinity, and I think that's a also prevalent point throughout this book. And you're trying to understand what is masculinity in this community and what is it in the United States at that time. And I had an excerpt actually. So this is Paul D, and you'll hear it in the quote, but it's him thinking back on his time with Mr. Gardner, who was the first white man who owned Sweet Home, and then school teacher coming and taking over. but this is Paula D thinking about this. It troubled him that concerning his own manhood, he could not satisfy himself on that point. Oh, he did manly things, but was that Garner's gift or his own will? What would he have been anyway, before Sweet Home, without Garner, in Sixo's country or his mother's, or God help him on the boat? Did a white man saying it make it so? Suppose Garner woke up one morning and changed his mind, took the word away. Would they have run then? And if he didn't, would the Pauls have stayed there all their lives? Why did the brothers need the one whole night to decide, to discuss whether they would join Sixo and Hallie? Because they had been insulated in a wonderful lie, dismissing Hallie and baby Suggs' life before Sweet Home as bad luck. I think that it was exactly what I was thinking, and they talk about it earlier on, is that Mr. Garner talks about, oh, my boys, or my men, my men. And then he's saying, okay, but if tomorrow you wake up and you decide that you're going to treat me poorly, or you decide that I'm not a man anymore, or, what I'm trying to say is, if he wakes up tomorrow and decides that I'm no longer a man, what does that make me?
I think at first I was a little bit affronted when Paul D first showed up and just immediately was like touching Sethe's breasts, and she was just not really offended and actually sort of comforted. And I think I missed the point at the beginning, but looking back on that passage, I was...
Wait, Phil, I wanted to make a comment.
Yeah.
I think again, it's similar to this concept that with Lord of the Flies, where we have to address an elephant in the room of just, we are three white people, almost 100 years. I mean, Jim Crow was still very recent, not in our lifetime, but very recent, past slavery, and we don't. It's impossible to comprehend, and it's very difficult for us. I'm finding it very difficult to talk about it, and I think you two share my sentiment, because it's just, and I think we'll talk about this with why this book is so popular and it's so different than other books we've read, but I'm just finding it very challenging to talk about it, and I don't know why that she's comfortable with that. Is it just that in 18 years she hasn't been comforted since her mother-in-law died? Is it that she lost her husband and this man knows her from a past that is unthinkable? I can't even begin to speculate why that would be an appropriate behavior for someone coming to visit you. Perhaps it is that you are used to your body not being your own, as horrible as that sounds. But yeah, I don't know. And it's hard for me to even speculate why it could be, to be honest with you. And I feel like I had to say that to you guys.
No, I agree, and thanks for saying that, Phoebe. To further that point, though, that we don't really know what it's like, I think that a topic of masculinity that is brought up very similar, or very same point in the book to that, is when she wakes up and says, man was nothing but a man, which was what baby Suggs always said. And I think that quote, where this is men is basically the only people in baby Suggs' life that were men, were either white men, which had mistreated her the entire time, and mistreat is the most under of statements, or black men who had their entire worth and value told to them by white men, and were in the same precarious position as she was.
Well, even like a mother looking out for her child. I mean, Sethe's own mother
Right.
couldn't even do anything to give comfort or care to her own child. Her child was not hers. Her
Right.
child was owned by the same person that owned her.
I just guess I don't really know if that necessarily like that this is a masculinity thing. This is like a humanity thing, like how you view humanity, because I think that Sethe like has the same sort, like, not just the men are having these questions of worth or these struggles of where they fit in life. That's not a masculinity thing. That's a humanity thing, because they were these people were seen as less than human for most of their lives. Which, like Phoebe said, like we can't even comprehend what that is like now. So yeah, I don't really think it's necessarily a masculine thing. I think some of that thoughts or ideas were put out by the men more just because Paul D talks about his worth, or he has that whole monologue in his head when he wants to go confront Sethe about Beloved, and then doesn't think, that's when he is thinking like, am I man just because Mr. Gardner boasted that he made his slaves men, or am I not? And then like he feels like he like isn't man enough to talk about it, so he says, oh, I want to get you pregnant instead because that is manly in his eyes. But I don't think this is necessarily a masculine confrontation. It's how are they as humans, and how do they see themselves as humans? How do they reconcile being treated as non-human for a lot of their life?
Yeah, I wonder I do agree. I wonder the only thing is about this, and this is kind of a more abstract conversation, and it would be hard to somehow even prove that this would be true or false. But I do think we talked last time about how people are conditioned, and men are conditioned to be protectors. So talking about Sethe's husband, Hallie, and how he finally snapped, or finally, the way that Paul D describes it, finally snaps, is when he sees the school teacher taking Sethe's breast milk from her by force. And I think that kind of does speak to masculinity a little bit, because I'm just speculating that he felt like he couldn't protect her in that moment, because that's like one of the most intimate things you could take from a woman, in my opinion. And so seeing that happen was the thing that snapped him, is kind of what the story alluded to. So I wonder that psychological impact on African-American enslaved men at the time of having women that they considered that they wanted to be protectors of, and not being able to do that.
I think that's where sort of I was getting at with why this is a masculine thing. I just think that it's odd. It's odd because of the dearth of this post-slavery Black authorship / like narrative. I'm not sure. Again, like as Phoebe said, this is just coming from a place of being very ignorant on the topic, but I do think that this is something that when you read about white people during this time period, there is a very strict patriarchy that perhaps was not evident in the Black community
Because of white people. Yeah. Does that convince you, Isaac, or do you still see it more as a humanity issue than a?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's both.
I think that. Yeah. I think it's both. I just didn't. I'm just saying I didn't view it as like a masculine or a feminine thing. I think. It's like this is a humanity thing.
Right. I think that Isaac and I are agreeing.
Yeah, I think the other thing I really, definitely, I think that's an interesting point. And I wanted to talk to you guys too, and alluded to this earlier, of just why this. I think the best way to ask it is, what did this uncover about slavery to you and racism? And I think, to me, this book really stood out among anything else I have ever read because of the atrocities that are just depicted in it. And I had a couple different pages I wanted to just share with you guys that really stood out to me and were shocking. This was about baby Suggs talking. She was getting frustrated with Sethe because Sethe was trying to make excuses for white people. And so this is that conversation. Grandma Baby said there's no defense. They could prowl at will, change from one mind to another, and even when they thought they were behaving, it was a far cry from what real humans did. They got me out of jail, Sethe once told baby Suggs. They also put you in it, she answered. They drove you across the river on my son's back. They gave me this house. Nobody gave me nothing. I got a job from them. He got a cook from them, girl. oh, so some of them do all right by us. And every time it's a surprise, ain't it? You didn't used to talk this way. Don't box with me. There's more of us they drowned than there is all of them ever lived from the start of time. Just saying, kind of what Mr. Garner was, you know, even though he was quote unquote nice, he owned slaves, you know, he perpetuated slavery and racism. And then the other one, I won't read the quote, but it's when she's talking about like all she could think about was the trees on the at Sweet Home, and when she said, I don't remember the boys hanging in the trees. Me immediately thinking a little boy hanging upside down on his knees, like his knees over the side of the tree, hanging upside down playing a tree, not black men being, you know, hung from a tree. And I think, I know, Phil, you're making that face at me, but that's the ignorance, and I'm owning that. I'm saying, like, it's just such
yeah.
I was like, oh my God, she's talking about people being lynched, you know? And I think that to me is what stood out about this book. It did not shy away. It was not trying to say it was okay because some white people helped in the end stop slavery. It was okay because, you know, these slaves got freed, and it was such a inspiring story. And it was okay because they found, I don't know, like, it wasn't okay. It was simply not okay. And there's still today repercussions because of that, you know, impactful repercussions because of that. And I think that's what this book, it was shocking to me as someone, as a white person, and who has not educated themselves obviously enough about what happened with slavery. And it's hard to read and it's hard to talk about, but I think I was happy that we read this because of this conversation that I'm able to have now with you guys. But I wanted to hear what you guys thought about it and what really stood out to you.
Yeah.
I think, Phoebe, you said it very well. She didn't shy away from anything, which I do think, yeah, it was brutal. It was gruesome, some of the stuff. Yeah, the whole stealing of her breast milk. I think the making of men by, like, Gardner. My biggest critique, which we'll get into later, is like I just really struggled with the plot about what was going on in the timeline and different stuff. But we were talking before, Phil sort of said, like, this is from mostly the perspective of a woman who had been driven crazy. Like, she was an escaped slave. Like, she had so much trauma and so much stuff built up. Like, that was her inner mind. So I give it some credit. It was tough for me to follow. Like I said in the beginning, I think that reading this one could be a chapter episode, each one, breaking it down, really trying to get stuff out of it. I hope we do it justice. I have a feeling we're not doing it justice with episode, and with the lack of, I think, understanding that I have on just the subject in general and then the book in total. But yeah, it's just a really you can't comprehend it, and it's just it's such a brutal, some of the imagery is just really brutal.
Yeah, I think like the whole Georgia scene with Paul D, we haven't even talked about that, him being in a box. Or just the fact that Baby Sugg said, I never saw what my kid's adult teeth looked like. That, to me, it's something you just so innately take for granted. Or Sethe didn't know if she was a good friend because she never had an opportunity to be a friend to anybody.
The word that I used was the rawness of this book. I think that the one passage that I wanted to read was about Stamp Paid, and he's talking sort of about, basically, I'll just read it. White people believe that whatever the manners, under every dark skin was a jungle, swift, unnavigable water, swinging, screaming baboons, sleeping snakes, red gums ready for their sweet white blood. In a way, he thought they were right. The more colored people spent their strength trying to convince them how gentle they were, how clever and loving, how human. the more they use themselves to persuade whites of something that the N-word believed they could not be questioned, the deeper and more tangled jungles grew inside. And then just to skip ahead a little bit, and it grew, it spread. And though afterlife it spread until it invaded the whites who had made it, touched them everyone, changed and altered them, made them bloody, silly, worse than they ever wanted to be. So scared they were the jungle that they had made. The screaming baboon lived under their own white skin. The red gums were their own. And I think that that's like, just, that really touched me. And I think that the fact that he's so conscious of this portrayal that black men are less than, and that like belief in that like continued dedication to that belief has made white people horrible people, and just like animalistic in their own sense. Their portrayal of blacks as animals has instead made the whites animals. And I think that that is really profound. I don't know how Toni Morrison got this all into one book.
Yeah.
It must have been just a ridiculous amount of research and hearing oral stories and just reading people what they wrote about it, because I mean, it was so much. There were just passages on passages. Like Isaac said, we could spend so much time.
Yeah, all great points. I know, I think, Isaac, you said too, just it's hard to do it all justice. And like you said, Phil, there's so many passages. There's so much we could take away. I did take away a lot from this. I'm curious about your ratings. Phil, would you mind just sharing how we rate books?
It's the Michelin star scale. So a 3 you would read again. A 2 is you would recommend this book, but you probably wouldn't read it again, but still a very good book. A 1 is nothing special. You didn't particularly love it. And then a 0 is just like, this book was a bad book. So I personally gave it a 2. Despite all of what we've said about how powerful this book was, I do think that Isaac has a really good point in that it was hard to follow. But obviously then it was phenomenal and really eye-opening.
Yeah, I gave it a 2.5 because I don't know that I'd read it again, only because I think there's other stories that, while I don't think they shed a light on the brutality and the cruelty like this story does, I think there's other stories that I'd like to be exposed to and learn about, and educate myself on. So I think that's maybe why I wouldn't read it again. Isaac, what did you think?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys are saying it, but I gave it a 1 for that. It was just too. It wasn't until it was probably halfway through the book where she starts to bring things together, where you realize, okay, so she killed her own kids to prevent her from saying. Also wild that a mother is like, you know what, I'm gonna kill my kid instead of let him go back to this. Yeah, we didn't. It's like the whole
probably
the fulcrum of the book.
Yeah.
Is all centered around,
Right.
which is just like just incomprehensible. So you finally get all this, and you're like, okay, all these flashbacks, and the first half of it, I didn't know who was talking, what time period it was in, but I was like ready to forgive all that when this all came together. I knew what was going on. And then she starts part 2 with maybe this isn't, I can't remember exactly, but it's from, then she labels each section like Denver, Sethe, and then it's from Beloved standpoint, and then I just got lost all over again. And it couldn't redeem it for me. Like I said, this was like a horror book. Like, undead child that was murdered by her mother back to wreak havoc and haunt the lives there, and just the time period and the horrors of just what actually happened. You combine that together, that is a horrific story. I just think the execution of the different flashbacks and keeping the timelines a little cleaner would have helped it out a lot more. But like we talked
Yeah.
about it so much, like definitely gained something from this book, but I would want to read it again to try to learn more, but I can't. It's just I'll look into something else, you know.
Yeah. I wanted to know if you guys could recommend to our listeners people who are looking to read something like Beloved, or if they enjoyed Beloved and they wanted to read something else, what would you recommend to them? So, Phil, what would you recommend?
Yeah, mine is the book Horse by Geraldine Brooks. I don't think anything I could ever recommend would be as deep as this one or raw, but I think it's a little bit easier to follow and it jumps throughout time. It's about a black boy / young man who trains thoroughbred horses in Kentucky, and he is a slave, and he's sort of transferred ownership. He's treated much better, but I think there's a lot of points in the book where you get this idea of a good white man, which the only reason he's treated well is because he's the only one that can control this horse, but then that's all taken away from him at anybody's
Right.
whim. But it's a really interesting story.
I did not know that story was about that. I did not know that's what that was about. So that's been on my to be read list, and I will definitely read that now. Isaac, what about you? What do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, Phil said it, but there's nothing that is going to be close to this kind of book that I've ever read to recommend. But I recommended The Parable of the Sower. It's a black voice, a little bit more sci-fi or futuristic, and kind of a similar idea of storytelling, or not idea of storytelling, but like structure, a little bit scattered. You kind of have to piece things together in the timeline and stuff. But another good black voice.
Yeah, I'm recommending something also from a enslaved person's perspective, and it is Homegoing by Ya Gassi. It's a pretty popular book, and it tells the crossing of an enslaved woman and their families, and it's a generational book, and I think it also does a pretty good job of exposing a lot of the atrocities, and it's a good story as well. Not a good story, but it is a well-written book. So I would recommend that if you haven't read it or heard of it. And I'm curious also now what you guys are reading other than Beloved, or something that you've read that you recently enjoyed. So Isaac, do you want to share with us what you're reading?
Yeah, I just finished Your Money or Life. It's by Joseph R. Dominguez and Vicky Robin. It's a self-help personal finance book, and if you liked I Will Teach You to Be a Rich by Ramit Sethi, you'll like this one as well.
Nice. Phil, what are you reading?
I just finished A Court of Broken Knives by Anna Smith Spark, which I would not recommend, actually. It was good, but just ridiculously dark. Anti-hero is the lowest. Like the king is absolutely mad and just loves killing everything, and just he's the hero of it's wild. Just you cannot get behind this guy, and everyone is horrible.
You're like, I hate this guy.
He's mad. One of the chants is blood, rape, death, and that's like what he's chanting while he's just killing everybody, and he's like Daenerys Targaryen, just
Going
like
insane.
going around winning, and he's winning everything, and you're just like, can this guy lose? But I liked a lot A Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, which I think you would like if you like either one, investigative books like detective novels, but two, if you like fantasy a lot, because it's a fantasy about a justice and his protege, and they're solving crimes, but also unveiling treason and a plot against the king.
Whoa, that sounds good. I would read that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you should.
I just read The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. You would like this if you like The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. If you haven't read that, you should. Or the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. I actually very much enjoyed it. I thought it was going to be like a stupid girly fantasy, and I think it was good. I think you both would probably like it, actually. It was cool.
Yes.
And before we go, I just want to share with everybody that on the 29th of July, we will be discussing The Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. And this is a fantasy book. It's the first book in a, I believe, 5-book series right now. Isaac, do you want to just tell us a little bit about that book?
Yep, it is the first book in a 5-part series that chronicles the adventures of Isabel, aka Lady Trent, a renowned dragon naturalist. The book begins with Isabella's early life, including her childhood, interest in dragons, and marriage. Then focuses on her first major dragon-related adventure, which involves an expedition to the mountains of Finistra in search of rockworms, which is a type of dragon.
I'm excited. So Phil apparently has read this.
It's one of my only books. Yes. Apparently I have. Which is why you included it on the book list. I've read all 5. I love
Cool.
them.
I think we all are looking forward to this fantasy read. So can't wait for that. And this is your bi-weekly reminder to call someone that you love. It could be a sibling or a friend or whoever picks up, and tell them about a good book that you recently read. Here's also a reminder to go to your library or use your Libby app to read a good book. And until we talk again, stay classy, second pagers. We'll see you later.
See you guys.
Bye, guys.
Let's go beyond.